Love is not for sale, but Tu Diep still used her entire fortune to keep James from his father. Love rarely announces itself in grand moments. More often, it hides in the small, exhausting details of everyday life, counting money at the end of a long day, wiping sweat from a child's forehead, choosing to stay quiet when the truth would hurt too much. Tu Diep's love lived exactly there. Her mornings began before the sun rose. The house was modest, the air already heavy with heat, and her pockets lighter than most people would dare admit. She measured her days in small numbers, a few 100,000 for wages, a little left for food, almost nothing for herself. Yet she never complained. To complain, she believed, was a luxury reserved for those who still had something to lose. To the world, Tu Diep was just a woman trying to survive, working the land, paying workers, caring for little Nie as if she were her own child. But beneath that ordinary rhythm was a quiet storm. Every coin she saved carried a name, James. Every sacrifice whispered a promise she never dared to speak aloud. James was not absent from her life. He was everywhere. In the empty chair at night, in the phone that never rang when she needed it most, in the questions people asked with careful politeness, when will he come back? They did not know that his distance was not a choice, but a barrier carefully built by a man who believed love could be bought, delayed, or erased. His father believed in transactions. Power had taught him that everything, loyalty, silence, even affection, had a price. Tu Diep knew this, and that knowledge terrified her more than poverty ever had. Because how do you protect love from someone who measures hearts like assets? So she did the unthinkable. She began to save, not for comfort, not for security, but for resistance. Each long day under the sun became a step toward a single moment she could not yet clearly see. She sold what little she had, worked harder than her body allowed, and accepted help only when pride no longer mattered. There was irony in it, one she understood too well. Love is not for sale, yet she was preparing to pay everything she owned, not to buy James, but to keep him free, to build a wall, not of anger, but of sacrifice between him and the man who called control love. This was only the beginning. The kind of beginning that looks ordinary from the outside, but inside, quietly, changes the course of a life forever. Money changes meaning when you do not have much of it. For Tu Diep, it was never about wealth, but about weight. The weight of every decision, every sleepless night spent calculating what could be spared and what must be endured. Each bill she folded into her worn envelope carried a quiet question. How much does love cost when dignity is at stake? Her days moved between exhaustion and determination. She negotiated wages, paid workers on time even when it left her with almost nothing, and returned home with aching hands. In the evenings, she listened to Nie's laughter, soft and unguarded, and felt both warmth and fear. What kind of future could she offer a child if she herself stood on the edge of collapse? James remained distant, though never forgotten. His voice, when it came through brief calls, sounded careful, too careful. He spoke of responsibilities, of time, of circumstances that refused to align. Tu Diep heard what he did not say. She knew his father's presence in every pause, every hesitation. Power had placed itself between them, quiet but absolute. Then came the message. Not a threat, not a command, an invitation. Polite, controlled, inevitable. A meeting, a conversation between reasonable adults. Tu Diep understood immediately what it meant. This was not about reconciliation, it was about terms. The night before, she counted her savings one last time. The number was both laughable and terrifying. It represented years of effort, of humility, of swallowed pride. It was not enough to impress anyone who measured life in millions, yet to her, it was everything. She arrived early, dressed simply, carrying no symbols of ambition, only resolve. Across the table sat a man who believed love could be managed like a business risk. He spoke of futures, of compatibility, of social balance. His words were smooth, practiced, almost kind. But kindness without empathy, Tu Diep realized, is just another form of control. She listened. She did not interrupt. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, though her hands trembled beneath the table. She did not ask for approval. She did not beg. She placed her savings between them, not as payment, but as proof. "I am not buying love," she said quietly. "I am protecting it." The room fell silent. In that moment, Tu Diep understood the true cost of her choice. She was not offering money. She was offering herself, her past, her future, and the fragile hope that love could survive without permission. And whether he accepted it or not, there would be no turning back. Power rarely raises its voice. It leans back, folds its hands, and waits for the other person to break first. Tu Diep felt this clearly as she sat across from James's father, the air between them heavy with things left unsaid. Outside, life continued as usual. Cars passed, people hurried home, ordinary days unfolding without knowing how fragile love could be behind closed doors. He studied her the way one studies a problem, not a person. His gaze lingered on her worn shoes, her simple clothes, the envelope she had placed on the table. There was no anger in his eyes, only calculation. He spoke slowly, explaining consequences as if teaching a child. James's future, the family name, the doors that would close if disobedience continued. Each word landed with practiced precision. Tu Diep listened, her heart rising and falling with each sentence. Fear crept in, not for herself, but for James. She imagined him trapped between loyalty and love, between blood and choice. How many people, she wondered, live like this every day, loving someone deeply, yet being forced to step aside because they do not belong to the same world? When she spoke again, her voice softened instead of hardening. She spoke of ordinary things, of mornings that begin too early, of counting money under dim lights, of raising a child who asks innocent questions about home and family. She spoke of James not as a name, but as a man who laughs quietly, who carries guilt too easily, who deserves a life chosen freely. Her words unsettled him. Power does not fear anger, it fears sincerity. For the first time, he shifted in his seat, yet pride held firm. He reminded her of the agreement she had once made, the promise to step away if James returned safely. Promises, he implied, are debts. Tu Diep felt the weight of that memory press against her chest. She did not deny it. Instead, she met his gaze and spoke with a calm that surprised even herself. "I will step back, but love is not something you can erase by force. I can leave, but James will decide who he becomes." Silence stretched between them. Outside, the sky darkened and lights flickered on one by one, small reminders of ordinary lives continuing, unaware of this quiet battle. Tu Diep rose from her seat, knowing she might lose everything. Yet as she walked away, she felt lighter. Love, she realized, is not proven by possession, but by the courage to protect someone's freedom, even if it costs you your own happiness. Some endings arrive quietly. No applause, no victory speeches, just a slow, aching realization that life will never return to what it once was. Tu Diep felt this kind of ending the morning after the meeting, when the sun rose as usual and the world behaved as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She returned to her routine. The land still needed tending, bills still waited to be paid. Ni still asked questions with bright, trusting eyes. Life, relentless and ordinary, moved forward. Yet something inside Tu Diep had changed. The envelope was gone. Her savings, every coin she had fought for, had disappeared into a moment no one would ever celebrate. Love had been spent, not wasted. James did not come back right away. Days turned into weeks, and silence filled the spaces where hope once lived. At night, Tú Diệp lay awake listening to distant sounds, dogs barking, motorbikes passing, the soft breathing of a child asleep nearby. She wondered if this was how most sacrifices ended, unnoticed, misunderstood, and deeply lonely. Then, one evening, her phone rang. His voice was different, not hurried, not cautious, just honest. James spoke of choices, of refusing protection that came with conditions, of walking away from a future designed by someone else. He did not mention money. He did not ask what she had given up. He only said, "I finally understand what freedom costs." Tú Diệp closed her eyes. Tears came, not from relief, but from release. Love had not guaranteed happiness. It had simply made truth unavoidable. When James returned, there was no grand reunion, no promises of wealth or ease, only two people standing in uncertainty, choosing each other without permission. The father's shadow still existed, but it no longer defined their steps. Control had failed where sacrifice had succeeded. Tú Diệp remained the same woman to the world, still working, still counting money, still living carefully. But inside, she carried something unbreakable. She had learned that love is not proven by how much one possesses, but by how much one is willing to lose. In everyday life, people often ask whether love is worth the cost. Tú Diệp never answered that question aloud. She lived it. And in doing so, she left behind a quiet truth. Love is not for sale, but it will always demand everything we are brave enough to give. The story of Tú Diệp teaches a lesson that feels both quiet and powerful, one that reflects the struggles many people face in everyday life. It reminds us that love is not something to be owned, controlled, or traded, even though the world often tries to treat it that way. First, the story shows that true love is rooted in freedom, not possession. Tú Diệp does not fight to keep James close by force, nor does she beg for acceptance. Instead, she chooses to protect his right to decide his own future. This teaches us that loving someone means respecting their independence, even when that choice causes personal pain. Love that demands control is not love. It is fear disguised as care. Second, the lesson highlights the quiet strength of sacrifice. Tú Diep's sacrifices are not dramatic or celebrated. She gives up her savings, her security, and her peace of mind without expecting recognition or reward. In daily life, many acts of love look the same: parents working silently, partners enduring hardship, individuals choosing honesty over comfort. These sacrifices may go unnoticed, but they shape lives in lasting ways. Another important lesson is about dignity. Despite being judged for her poverty, Tú Diệp never trades her self-respect. She proves that dignity does not come from wealth or status, but from integrity and courage. Her story challenges the belief that money determines human worth, reminding us that character is the truest measure of value. Finally, the story teaches that love does not guarantee happiness, but it leads to truth. Tú Diệp does not know how her choices will end, yet she chooses them anyway. In doing so, she gains clarity, self-respect, and inner peace. Sometimes the greatest reward of love is not a perfect ending, but the knowledge that we stayed true to ourselves. In the end, Tú Diep's story leaves us with a simple but profound lesson. Love is not for sale, yet it always asks for courage, and those who love with integrity may lose comfort, but they never lose themselves.